Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe even good evening to you. And welcome to Spider Strategies monthly training webinar. This month, here for August, we're going to be covering using Connect and Excel imports to build and update scorecards in QuickScore. I'm Tom Keating. I'm the Training and Customer Experience Consultant at Spider Strategies. There's a quick picture of me. And also, let me just highlight my email address because I always welcome any communications from any and all of our customers and partners. I'm available to you at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com. A quick look at today's agenda. It's a simple, really simple 3-point agenda in total. We're going to be talking about a Connect introduction. Really, the idea behind that is the presumption that someone in the listening and viewing audience may not know anything at all about Spider Strategies Connect. So we'll cover who, what, where, why, how, but not necessarily in that order. Secondly, we'll show you how to use Connect and an Excel import file to create a scorecard. And lastly, using Connect and an Excel imports to update your scorecard in QuickScore. Before jumping into the actual content and presentation, just want to share a couple brief webinar logistics with you. This webinar is being recorded for future use and or reference by you and your cohorts. All attendees on this webinar are presently muted. I personally really wish that we could leave the phone lines open so that we could make this whole experience more of a dialogue, like a classroom type setting. But unfortunately, we've learned that if we do that, we almost always inevitably run into some kind of background noise or disruptions or just general noise pollution that kind of hampers the whole experience. So with that said, if and when you do have communications you'd like to share with me either during this presentation or certainly afterwards, again, I invite you to email me personally or our education department at learn@spiderstrategies.com. All right, so back to the agenda. We're going to start again with a Connect introduction. This is the element of this whole presentation that we'll just kind of call Connect 101. And again, the presumption is that somebody out there might not know what Connect is at all. So let's jump into that. So first of all, what is Connect? Quite simply, it is Spider Strategies' proprietary import utility for QuickScore. Why would you use Connect? Two basic reasons. First of all, to create scorecards in QuickScore via an import process, or to update existing scorecards in QuickScore, again, via an import process. Either of those things can, of course, be achieved and accomplished within QuickScore itself, but the idea behind doing it in an import process is really time savings, time and effort savings. If you can create an import file appropriately structured and accomplish a broad import to spare you the one by one, either creation or data provision, let's go for that approach. Third, who uses Connect? It's any licensed user who is responsible for creating or updating scorecards in QuickScore. And, this is important, has appropriate privileges to create or update scorecards in QuickScore. Next, when would you use Connect? Honestly, whenever you need to create a scorecard or update a scorecard in QuickScore. And again, want to do it via an import process rather than manually. Where do you access Connect? It's very simple, folks. If you know your QuickScore URL where you access your QuickScore environment, you add a /connect to the end of that URL, and that's how you'll access Spider Strategies Connect. And then lastly, how. So how, if we're going to address the how, that really is the meat of the rest of this presentation. So with that said, let's jump back into our agenda, check off the first thing, and move on to the second agenda item, which is using Connect and an Excel import file to create a scorecard. So the goal of this how step of the process is to create and populate a scorecard like this real world-ish but mythical utilities company scorecard that I'm going to show you now. So I'm going to leave my presentation mode. I'll bring up QuickScore and show you the existence of an organization called, in the far upper left, the utility company for training. Within that organization, we have a scorecard called Utility Scorecard. I'm going to click Expand All at the bottom so that you can view all of the components of this existing utility company scorecard. And you'll see that it's comprised of perspectives such as financial, objectives like institutionalized energy, fuels and savings conservation, and then measures such as total energy cost savings, total cost of energy over last year, and so on. This scorecard is exactly what we're going to create here today during my demonstrations. And again, I'll just give you an overview of this, that it has a financial perspective, a customer perspective, internal processes, and learning and growth. Again, each of which are supported by underlying objectives, and each of the objectives are, of course, fed information from the underlying measures. And this scorecard is built up for the entire year of 2018. And we, again, will be not only building the scorecard, but we'll be populating the scorecard as well, both of which through the Connect utility. So with that said, I'll jump back into my presentation and forge ahead. Okay, so we'll give you, before I jump into a live demonstration of Connect, I'm going to give you a quick just visual introduction to Connect. How does it look? What does it look like, and how does it work? So the Connect homepage is really beautifully simple in nature. It's comprised of really just an imports area and a data sources area. This screen capture shows you a pristine Connect environment under the presumption that many of you will be starting with Connect from scratch, very first time. This is what you'll experience when you log into Connect. Of course, we'll be creating new imports by clicking the Create New Import button. And with regard to the data sources, I'd invite you in advance to next month's, September's free training webinar, where we will be addressing diverse data sources that are available to you. For today's session, we're focusing purely on Excel files, Excel or CSV files, as the import files that we will employ via Connect in our import processes. But if you click on Create New Import from the Connect homepage, you'll be navigated into the Edit Import screen. And you see here 4 easy steps to defining and importing. And in this case, our first example is going to be, again, creating a scorecard via Connect. So effectively, you're just going to navigate from left to right. You start with basic information, you move on to source data information, thirdly, destination information, and lastly, mapping information. So with that said, that process is quite simple and straightforward. We'll return to that in just a second. But before we get there, the next logical question is, what does a Connect scorecard structure import file look like? So I've got a screen capture one. I don't want to take the time to go out and open Excel for you, but here's a screen capture of an example, a prototypical example of an empty Connect import file. And you'll see the columns that exist of scorecard, then perspective, then objective, performance measure, and so on. So this is not necessarily required to be in this format, but this is a really good prototypical example of an import file for a structure, a scorecard structure. And I'm now showing you an example of that same file, but populated with the information that we're actually going to be importing into QuickScore via Connect. So again, this is our utility scorecard. So I took the time to show you that existing utility scorecard. This is the file that we used to create that scorecard in QuickScore. You see the scorecard name of utility scorecard in column A, the perspectives that we looked at of financial, customer, internal processes, so on in column B. All of the various objectives underlying those distinct perspectives in column C, the performance measures themselves in column D. And from column D on out to the right, we're addressing properties of each and every one of those measures that we will have in our scorecard. So the calendar of monthly is what we've set across the board. You can, of course, have quarterly or yearly or even weekly calendar update requirements. What type of aggregation should each measure employ? What is its data type? What's its scoring type, which is very important, of course, to get your scoring type accurate and correct. And then based on the scoring type, the columns from there out to the right really reflect things like if it's a goal-only type of measure, then you really only need one threshold, one goal set. If it's a goal and red flag, then of course you need the red flag value and you need the goal value. If it happens to be a 4-color orange type of measure, then you're going to need more thresholds. So again, the nature of this import file is it can be very diverse, but it needs to just accommodate your desired scorecard structure that you'll eventually have in QuickScore. With that said, let's just go back and go just a little bit deeper into a preview of the 4 steps. I gave you a very broad overview of a left to right, through this Connect process, but let's just dive a little bit deeper before we get into a live demonstration. So the first step in the process is to define basic information in Connect. So in here, you're simply giving this Connect import process a name. You're defining what type of data source you're going to employ. Again, for today, we're going to be focusing purely on Excel. Third is the import type. And this is very important because you do have to tell Connect what you're aspiring to do with the import file. And it's going to be either create a scorecard, update a scorecard, or update an initiative. Those are your 3 choices. And then lastly, of course, you're going to point to the actual import file that you're going to use through Connect. Then moving on to the second step, which is the source data. At this point, what Connect has done is it has read in the file that you have pointed it to, and it is now reflecting that file to you in this, we'll call it a spreadsheet down along the bottom. If your import file has been set up appropriately, this step of the process can be really easy because you see that the yellow flags or labels across the top of all of the different columns represented in that spreadsheet, they have been identified automatically, again, because of the appropriate names that have been placed in the first row of your spreadsheet. But the idea here is to help Connect understand how each column should be employed. What is its role? What is its job in the import process? And you can do some dragging and dropping from the unused column labels at the top down on top of the existing spreadsheet down below. Again, this is just a screen capture at this point, and I'll show you live in a minute how the source data screen actually can be employed. The third step is to define the destination of the import. And what's important here is that you need to have an organization existing and open to receiving the new scorecard structure that you're going to be importing. You'll note that this utility company for training that is presently highlighted on the left has a gray circle to the left of it. That's a visual indication to you that there is no scorecard presently existing in that organization. So you highlight the empty organization that you want to point your new scorecard to, and then proceed on to step 4, which is mapping. And again, when you're creating a scorecard into an empty organization via Connect, the mapping is really straightforward and simple. You're just effectively saying, take in yellow the utility scorecard that I identified earlier that's coming from the import file and point it into my new empty organization, in this case called utility company for training. And that, in a nutshell, is what you do to set up an import process via Connect. And again, when you're done, everything that has been successfully defined and set up will be colored blue, and you now are ready to go to then actually run that import process via Connect. Okay, so after that introduction and preview to what we're going to be doing, let's actually go in and build a scorecard via Connect within QuickScore. So again, we talked about the utility company for training that exists and the nature of what we're going to be replicating. I also have a brand new, wide open, empty organization called August 30 Utility Organization. So I'm going to select it and just show you that here within QuickScore, we have an empty organization which is effectively waiting for a scorecard to be defined. Of course, I can manually click Create Scorecard and get into the process right within QuickScore of creating that scorecard. But, of course, the goal today is to instead employ Connect to create that scorecard. So up along the top, I have another tab up here, which is, again, pointing to the very same QuickScore environment. And I'm going to simply change the URL, as we discussed earlier, to include /Connect at the end. And hit Enter, and I'm presented with the Connect login screen. Of course, you need to authenticate yourself by providing an appropriate username and password. which I'll do, and voila, I'm brought to the Connect homepage. So this is what we saw in the screen capture earlier. Again, an empty, pristine presentation of the Connect environment. I'll click Create New Import in the upper left, and we'll start the process again from left to right. So I'll click on Basic Information, and we'll give this the name of New Utility Scorecard. The data source that I'm employing again is Excel or CSV. The import type in this case, I need to change it from Update Metric Values to Create Scorecard. Again, I mentioned earlier that your three choices for import types are updating metrics, creating a scorecard, or updating initiative status. In this case, we're creating a scorecard, and I'll browse out and point to the appropriate file that I'd like to employ to create the scorecard within QuickScore. And this, again, I'm not going to show it to you, but it is literally the file that I showed you the screen capture of for that utility company. And I'll say, because I practiced this earlier, I'm going to overwrite any existing files with the same name, but you may not have to do that. And I'll click OK. Okay, so step one, again, is now colored blue. Basic information has been provided. We'll move on to step two, which is to define the source data information. Again, folks, this is very much like what we saw on the screen capture I showed you earlier, where all of the columns that exist down here within this preview of the spreadsheet for the structure that I'm pointing to have been sort of automatically identified with the appropriate label so that the import process knows where to point and what to do with each of these distinct columns, okay? There may be some situations if your import file has not been set up in exactly the right way where something may not have been identified. So I'm going to just temporarily remove the measure label from the top of column D and I just dragged it back up to the top. So if and when during the setup of an import process you find a column that you know that you want to include into the eventual scorecard that has not yet been labeled, you simply drag and drop the appropriate label to the top of that column header. Again, if a scorecard import file has been set up in the right way, this step of the process is really easy and can be virtually automatically done for you. I'll click OK at this point to move on to the third step of the process. Again, notice source data is now colored blue. I'll move ahead to the destination organizations step of the process. Again, we're looking for an organization that doesn't already have a scorecard in it. Hopefully you all know that there's sort of a one-to-one relationship between an organization that can have one and only one scorecard. So our utility company for training already has a scorecard. If I click on it, nothing appears in the right, nothing appears at the bottom. However, if I click on our empty August 30 utility organization, you'll notice that at the bottom, it has identified that that is, the destination where this import should go. So that takes care of the destination step of this creating a scorecard process. I'll click OK. And then we move to the last step of the scorecard creation process, which is mapping. Again, I mentioned earlier that when you're creating a scorecard, this mapping step of the Connect process is really straightforward and easy because we're basically taking that utility scorecard and pointing it to our empty organization, and that's all there is to map. So we're ready to go, and I, again, can click OK. The import process has been set up and completed. Everything is blue. I'll click Save, and I now have the presentation of an import process here within the Connect homepage. At this point, over towards the right, I'll click Run Now to run that import process. It occurs very quickly and easily, and I end up with a result of green success. Yay, we've created a scorecard. So let's go back into QuickScore and take a look at the result of that effort. So I'm going to go back into Scorecard. I'll refresh QuickScore, and you now see that under the August 30 utility organization in the far upper left in the black area, there now exists a utility scorecard with the 4 perspectives of financial, customer, and so on. Each of them have the appropriate underlying objectives as well as underlying measures. So we have very successfully created a scorecard here in QuickScore. Of course, the scorecard is devoid of any values, any measured data, so it's empty. across the board from bottom to top. So the next process, of course, will be to populate this scorecard within the August 30 utility organization. Okay, bear with me as I bring back up the presentation so we can just proceed through our agenda. So we've taken care of building a scorecard via Connect. The third step of our agenda is now using Connect and Excel import files to update the scorecard. Before we get into the presentation, again, bear with me as I give you kind of a preview of how that process works. Again, we navigate into the edit import step of the Connect process. Again, that's done just by saying create an import. And you'll notice in this case, when you're creating an import to update a scorecard, there is one additional opportunity, which is to schedule it. So again, it's the same left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, through the same steps that we've already covered. And then there's now the additional schedule opportunity available to you. Again, let's just sort of preview each of those steps and how it's a little bit different when you're updating a scorecard in QuickScore via Connect. The basic information remains largely the same. Again, you're giving the process a name, you're telling it what the data source is. The import type in this case, of course, is going to be update metric values. You're not creating a scorecard anymore, you're updating an existing scorecard. And of course, you point to the specific file, the import file that has the value information for your scorecard. In the second step of source data, again, it looks quite a bit the same because, again, you're being presented with a view, if you will, a spreadsheet view of the import file that you're employing. The differences here are along the top. Notice that you have some radio buttons that allow you to define, how you should work with the information that's coming in from the import file. And there are more properties up here than I really think we should be covering here today, but one that's very important to know about is the second radio button down is use a date header row for imports. And that's important because in a few minutes I'll be showing you how to create an appropriately formatted import file, which in the perfect world is set up like this one you're viewing here. Within that import file, row 1 contains column identifiers that include the organization name, an ID, which was pulled from the scorecard itself in QuickScore, a measure name that again was pulled from the scorecard in QuickScore, and then date information, and of course under the date column headers are values for each and every one of those measures within this import file. So this is something, again, we'll do this live in just a few minutes, but this is a perfect setup in terms of this thing ready to go for source data. You'll note that there's really only the need for one yellow label, which is pointing to the unique ID or name, and then that every column is identified with a date, and under each column you have values, because the three primary things you need are you need a unique identifier, you need date information, and you need measure value information in your update file via Connect. Let's move on to the third step. Again, the destination organization. This is the same general premise of where should this all be going? Where are we pointing this import to? It's different, of course, than how we did in the create scorecard process, because we are now pointing to an existing scorecard. We're not looking for an empty organization. We're looking to find the organization we want to point to and the scorecard within it where we want this import file to be directed. On the right, I've expanded the view of the overall utility scorecard under the premise that there may be situations where you're not updating an entire scorecard across the board. You're just looking to update certain elements of an existing scorecard. Perhaps you just want to update the three measures that are visible to you right here. So if that is the case, you can get down to the measure by measure, minutia level, detail level, and just update specific measures throughout your scorecard. In our case, again, in the demo and with this screen capture, we're looking to update the entire scorecard from top to bottom, every measure within it. So what I have done here is highlight utility scorecard, and you see along the bottom that every measure throughout the scorecard is now understood that it is a destination for this import process. Let's move ahead to the fourth step of the setup process, which is mapping. again, this is where it gets a little more complex than it was when you were creating a scorecard. You'll recall in creating a scorecard, it was just, hey, take my import file, the whole file wholesale, and put it towards a new empty organization. In this case, we're now kind of down into the weeds where we want to make sure that the row by row unique identifier that we set up back in the source step is being appropriately mapped to the destination measure within the scorecard. Again, if the import file was created from within QuickScore itself, this step of mapping should be extremely easy for you. It should pretty much, again, happen automatically, where the appropriate ID numbers are being lined up, and you can pretty much usually just kind of okay your way through this process. And then lastly, should you desire to schedule the running of this connect import process at a different point in time somewhere in the future, or with any kind of sense of regularity, there is a scheduling opportunity. This is not very often used when you're working with Excel import files. The Excel import file setup is quite manual, and there really is typically not a reason to be automating that to occur again and again and again, because the Excel files themselves by nature are static. Once you get into connecting to other data sources like databases or SOAP data sources or what have you, which again we'll be covering in September, next month's training webinar, then scheduling becomes a little bit more pertinent. But when you're just importing Excel files, there's usually not a lot of purpose to setting up a schedule for that import. With all that said, again, the results of your efforts to set up from left to right all the 5 steps of the import process give you a result of blue and successful definition of all those steps. With that said, of course, what the next typical question that I get from people is, all right, that's great. You've shown me how to set it up, but these import files, Tom, you've kept alluding to the idea of an appropriately set up or created import file that you keep saying should come from QuickScore. Well, how do I do that? And you guys will see here in the demonstration that in version 3.2, our newest version of QuickScore, we have set up for you a great, simple, easy way to get an import file created right out of QuickScore, which again has all the appropriate names, IDs, and everything ready to go for you. So here's a view of how an import file will look when you're creating it within QuickScore. And you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner a download import file. So QuickScore helps you format the import file appropriately. You then have to go out, take it out, put it into Excel, and populate it with values. So the next image that I have here for you is an import file downloaded out of QuickScore and then populated with 1 month, in this case it's August of 2017, 1 month's worth of data for all of our measures throughout our utility company scorecard. And that idea here is for one single month. Be aware that, of course, if you're looking to populate a scorecard with a lot of information, many time periods, whether when you're first building up your scorecard and you want to load it with previous year's information that you have, you can, of course, create a very similar import file by just extending the date range when you're setting it up. Again, download that file, again, turn around and populate it with all of the values for all of the various time periods that you want to import. And then this file is ready to go as an import file via Connect. Okay, so with all that said, via screen captures and sort of preview of the process, let's actually get into a demonstration of all of that. I'm going to return to QuickScore. And again, what I need to have now to forge ahead and import data into this scorecard is I need the appropriate import files. So I'm going to start by clicking on this newly created but empty utility scorecard. And again, the preview, the overview of it shows me a whole lot of nothing because there's no data in it. And to create an import file, the first important step is you have to click on the Measures tab. You have to be looking at a tabular view of your scorecard so as to create the appropriate import file. If you, what you do is go to the upper right and employ the Send To drop-down menu, and at the bottom, there are, again, in version 3.2 of our wonderful software, we've added 2 new export destinations. One is to create a scorecard import file, which is to create a structure file, to create a new one, if you want to make a copy of this scorecard. The last one at the bottom is the measure value import file. Please note that if you are viewing your scorecard in the Overview tab and go to Send To, you will not see either of those two options at the bottom. Okay, so it's important that you be on the Measures tab, use the Send To dropdown, and select Measure Value Import File. And this walks you through a three-step wizard, very easy to use and work with, where it's all, because I already had my appropriate scorecard highlighted, it already has populated on the right from the August 30 utility organization. It already has the August 30 utility organization scorecard, and I am going to click on the drop down here to indicate that I want to include all the descendants of that entire organization. So every element of the scorecard should be included here, and I'll click Next. Then we want to define the date range that we want to create an import file for. In this case, we'll just start with just a single month. So let's go with November of 2017. I'll start on the 1st, and I'll end again November. Bear with me as I navigate back to November. Whoop, I went too far. November of 2017, and go to the 30th. Okay, so this is a single month import file that I'm creating first. I do want my dates in columns so that, again, it's formatted like we saw in the presentation that I showed you earlier. If by chance you are aspiring to also update any thresholds in your scorecard via an import process, then you do need to flip it to have the dates in rows. That's another topic that we're not going to be covering today, but again, if anyone has curiosity about that, feel free to contact me anytime. But today, we're keeping it simple and using dates in columns as the format we desire, and we'll click Next, and voila, there it is, the import file, just like what I showed you earlier, appropriately formatted with the organization, unique identifiers for each and every measure, the presentation of the measure name, and an empty column for November of 2017. And what we want to do is download this import file so that we can work with it and populate it with 1 month's worth of values for all of our measures throughout the scorecard. So in the lower left corner, it has downloaded Excel to me. I'm opening it up. I'm going to jump into Enable Editing here in Excel just to make things a little bit easier to view. I'm going to just expand a couple columns, and you see that there we have everything we just saw now, of course, in Excel, and I want to populate the November column with some actual data. I'm just going to spare you guys watching me type a bunch of numbers in. So I'm going to do a little sort of cooking show magic here. I'm going to go out and copy and then paste values for all of those measures throughout the entire utility organization. And then, of course, what we now need to do is save this. So we need to put it somewhere where we can refer to it quickly in just a few minutes. So I'll go to Save As, and I'll go to my desktop, where I've got a folder for our August webinars, and today is, of course, Thursday, and I'll just go ahead and leave it as its normal name, but just put in 1 month at the end, okay? So August 30 utility organization, measure value import for 1 month, and we'll click Save. So that file is ready to go. Now, while we're here in QuickScore, because what I'm going to want to show you is not only updating 1 month, but I also want to show you the opportunity to update multiple time periods across the entire year of 2018. We actually are going to update 13 months. So before I leave this scorecard behind, we're going to go through that process one more time to create another import file for a 13-month period. So again, I'll create another measure import file. Again, it's for the August 30 organization. Again, I want to include all the descendants, everything throughout the scorecard, top to bottom. Click Next, and this time we'll define a time range of December 2017 through December of 2018. So bear with me as a minute here as I just kind of encompass that entire beginning of December 17 to end of December 2018. Again, we want the dates in columns. Again, I'll click Next, and voila, again, we now have an import file ready to go to download. Again, I'll click Download in the lower right. Once again, it is downloaded for me an Excel file. It exists in the lower left-hand corner. I can click on it to open it up. Give it a second here to open within Excel. Again, quickly, I'll enable editing. And again, just to make things easier for you, you all to view here in the webinar, I'll just expand the width of all those columns. And again, we need to populate the information, or all of these columns with information for all 13 months. Again, a little, we'll call it, I always like to call it the cooking show magic, where I'll just go out here and copy all of that information, all the values for all measures for 13 months, and that is now ready to go. And you'll note that some of these have some formulas, but the net is that we have values in here ready to go. And again, we'll save this. So file again, save as, and again, I'll plop it in that same destination folder of the Thursday folder. And we'll call this one, we'll call it many months. Whoops, bad typing, but same idea. And again, the name doesn't so much matter. You can name these things anything you want. I just need to obviously uniquely identify them, and we'll click save. So at this point, folks, we have created 2 import files ready to go for us to employ via Connect. So let's jump back into Connect. Oops, sorry, come on, there we are. And sorry, wrong tab. All right, so in Connect, we're just going to create a couple new import processes. So we'll click on Create New Import. Again, click Basic Information. I'm just going to call this 1 month. Just keep it simple. So it's a 1-month import process. Again, we're pulling from Excel. And in this case, we are updating metric values. We're not, last time through here, we created a scorecard. This time, we're updating metric values. Of course, we'll click Browse, and I need to navigate out to the appropriate folder, which was Thursday, and we need, sorry, I can't see the names. I can't see which is which. I just need the 1 month. Okay, so there we go. We got the 1 month file pointing to 1 month, and in the upper right, I'll click OK. Step 1 is completed. Let's move on to source data. So again, different from when we created a scorecard, but this is what I showed you in an earlier preview slide, is that, again, due to the nature of the fact that we took and created the import file from QuickScore and the scorecard within it, it has all the information that we need, and it is already automatically identified that what it can use as a unique identifier for the import process is in column B, and it is set it up as the metric ID/name. Again, if you create your import files in a different way, you may need to manually do some of this mapping yourself, and it's easy to do. If you get in here and see that columns are not identified, are not labeled in a way that the Connect process needs to understand how to employ them, it's a simple drag and drop process over into your destination. So you can do it manually. The other thing, as I spoke about earlier, is when you've created your import file via QuickScore, and that whole process we went through, if you have a date column, as we do here in column D, with values underneath it, up at the top, you want to use the second radio button down, which is use a date header row for imports. When I click that, you see that the first row of my, we'll call it spreadsheet along the bottom, has now been labeled in orange, and it now understands that it should be looking to that row for a date field at the top, and then also it understands that it should read the values in all of the rows underneath it into that particular period of time, which in this case, again, is November of 2017. You do have other choices, of course, in terms of time periods. You could change it and say, use a specific time period for each one. If you don't have an appropriately formatted file where you do have information, but it doesn't indicate what date it should go to, you can manually define that. But again, in our case, because we set up the import file appropriately, it's a simple click on use a date header row for imports. So that takes care of step 2, which is the source data, and we click OK. Moving on to the destination metrics step of the setup process, we're pointing this, of course, to our August 30 utility organization. And on the right, we see that scorecard. And again, I could take the time here to open this up. And again, if I was importing and only had data for just a couple of measures, not the whole scorecard across the board, but maybe just 3 or 4 measures, I could point to them uniquely and specifically here by just clicking on them. In our case, we want to import to the entire scorecard. We have information for every measure in the entire scorecard. So I clicked on Utility Scorecard at the top, and notice that along the bottom, it now understands that every one of these measures throughout the entire scorecard should be a destination for the import. Okay, we'll move ahead. I'll click OK in the upper right and move ahead to the mapping step of the process. Again, you know that when we were doing mapping earlier, it was extremely simplistic. It was just one big old file going to one empty organization. But here again, because we set our import file up appropriately, we labeled that column B as the unique ID column that it should use for mapping. It has taken care of all the mapping for us automatically. Again, if you happen to be attempting to do an import via Connect with a file that doesn't have the appropriate format and really didn't come from QuickScore, and so maybe someone had set it up manually, there may be a situation where some elements within the scorecard are not mapped to an import piece of information. So if you happen to have anything on the left in the unused category and you have empty mapped to on the right-hand side, you can just manually drag and drop elements into the appropriate location to map them. Again, hopefully, you shouldn't even have to do that if you started the process from within QuickScore and created your import file from there. It should be really very much a moot point. So at this point, the mapping step of the process is complete. And again, we can click OK. Again, I mentioned obviously that scheduling is available to you. I said that, when you're doing Excel imports, you don't typically use the scheduling because, again, the Excel file is static in nature, so there's really no point in, going back to it again and again and again with any kind of frequency. And again, in terms of just getting it done, it's easier just to run it now. But if you wanted to schedule something, you do have the opportunity to define frequency of various time periods on the first, second, eighth, whenever day or of the month. You can define the time, AM, PM, and of course, you can select the appropriate time zone when that process should occur. In our case today, for this training class, we're not going to schedule it. It's not a necessity, so I'm not going to schedule this process and click OK. So 4 out of the 5 bubbles here are blue, but again, scheduling is optional. So it's not a problem that schedule is gray. At this point, we have completed the definition of this whole import process in Connect, and I can click Save. And it exists, of course, as an import process available to me. I see it underneath the Create Scorecard process we ran earlier, and what I want to do is run it now. So I'll click Run Now. It occurs immediately. I see the result of success. One thing for you to be aware of is that if you do an import process and it fails, obviously you won't see success and it will be red. There's also the potential that it partially succeeds, where some elements of the destination scorecard are left unfulfilled. So you may also get an indication of partial success is what it says, and it will be in yellow. So anyway, we have succeeded in this case. So real quickly, let's go take a look at the result of importing 1 month's worth of data into our August 30 utility organization. Now we're looking presently towards the upper right. I'm looking at December 2018. So I'm just going to quickly navigate. It was November 2017, right, that we created data for. So now, if I go in here, I see that I do have information that has been uploaded, imported into our scorecard. So for November 2017, all of the measures reflect data. The objectives that the measures roll up to reflect data, the perspective similarly, and all the way up to the scorecard header. And that all is just for 1 month at this point in time. So just wanted to sort of walk before we run in terms of uploading data. Just want to give you the sense of how this is done. And the reason I started with a monthly import is once your scorecard is set up, is populated with data, more often than not, you're going to be using Connect to do monthly or potentially quarterly, or you might even get it down to the weekly level. But you'll be doing just sort of one time period at a time updates so as to keep your scorecard current. So that's just a perfect example of one single month's import file and how to use it via Connect. Now we want, at this point, the satisfaction of a more robust and completed scorecard here for our August 30 utility organization. So we want to now go back and create another import using the 13 months or the many months import file that I created. So I'll do this fairly quickly because you'll see it's an extremely similar process where, again, we start with basic information, and I'll just call this many months. Again, we are using an Excel data source. The import type, again, is we're updating metric values, and we just simply need to browse out and go find the appropriate many months import file. After pointing to it, I'll click OK. Moving on to the source data step. Again, same idea here. It's already identified that it can uniquely pick and proceed with information into the ID values rather than the names. And of course, we have all these different columns coming for all the different months. And what we again want to do is just select use a date header row for imports, so that again, that first row is now colored in orange, and the software understands that it should look to that row to find dates, and then it should look under those dates to get the values that it should be imported. And we'll click OK. We'll move to the destination metric step of the process. Again, we're pointing this towards that August 30 utility organization, and of course the full-on complete utility scorecard over on the right. Highlight that. Again, all of the measures are presented at the bottom as destinations. Again, click OK. Moving to the mapping step. Again, it has identified the source and the destination and mapped them appropriately. Again, I can click OK. And again, I'm not going to bother with scheduling this process. So completed that quite quickly and easily. I'll click Save. And the next and last step here is to run that import process via Connect. Now it occurs immediately. Again, we get the result of success. And if we jump back over to our scorecard and refresh the screen, we now see that all the way from November through December of 2017 into January and all the other months in 2018 are now populated with values across the board for all perspectives, all objectives, and all measures throughout our entire scorecard. Okay, let me just jump back to my presentation here. Okay, so we have achieved all three of our agenda items for today. We gave you a broad introduction to Connect, what it is, who, what, where, why, how. We used Connect and an Excel import file to create a scorecard. And then, of course, we use Connect and a couple different Excel import files to update that scorecard. I'd like to please invite you to join us again in September for our next webinar, where we will again be addressing Connect. And in that session, we'll be talking about using Connect to access other data sources and again to do a bit more automation of data imports. I hope today's session has been helpful to you and educational. Thank you very, very much for attending. And again, before I let you go, I truly invite you to contact me anytime. Again, Tom Keating at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com, or of course, contact our education department at learn@spiderstrategies.com. Thank you all very much for your time and attention, and have a great rest of your day.